Greetings, my fellow Fright Fiends. It's your buddy BoogeyMan Ben here for a new episode of BoogeyMan Ben's Horror Zone. And today's video is a video that I was kind of inspired to do by a friend of mine here on YouTube. He goes by Horrific Nightmares JM, and he did a breakdown of the Psycho film series. Now, I've talked about this before on this channel. In fact, years ago, I did a retrospective on the Psycho film series, and I've done individual videos talking about like Psycho 3 when it was the 30th anniversary. But for people that don't know, the Psycho film franchise is my second favorite horror film franchise. It's just after Friday the 13th. I love the Psycho films. I adore Anthony Perkins. He's my favorite actor of all time. I've talked about it many times because I do have that Anthony Perkins tribute series. I am finishing up the book on Anthony Perkins' filmography that I will be reviewing later this month. And I thought this would be a kind of a cool time to do a ranking video of my second favorite horror film franchise. Earlier this year I did one on Friday the 13th, and that was 13 movies because I included Never Hike Alone. For this video, I'm going to include the 4 films with Anthony Perkins as the title character, as well as 1998 reboot by Gus Van Sant. I will not be including the pilot for the Bates Motel television series with Bud Cort and Lori Petty from the 80s, or the Bates Motel series that ran for 5 seasons with Freddie Highmore and Vera Farmiga. This will exclusively be the Psycho films that were in theaters, or with the exception with Psycho 4 was aired on the Showtime cable network, but it was still within the Psycho film timeline. So that is what I'm going to be doing, and I hope everyone looks forward to this. Please stay tuned. And before I get started, one thing I do want to plug in, and it's one of the most important horror film documentaries I've ever seen. I did a review on it that was pretty piss poor back in 2010 when I first started doing videos. But I want to talk about Rob Galluzzo's Psycho Legacy documentary. Rob Galluzzo just did a fantastic job in this documentary. He got fantastic interviews with the late Hilton Green, Tom Holland, Jeff Fahey, Diana Scarwood, Olivia Hussey, Henry Thomas. Fantastic across the boards. It was so amazing to watch this, and was a true tribute to someone who loves the Psycho film franchise and the performance by the amazing late great Tony Perkins. It truly is a fantastic documentary that I totally recommend to people that have not seen it, that love the Psycho films as much as I do. I definitely recommend picking it up. So now on with my breakdown. So number 5 for me, should be no surprise, is the Psycho remake. Now, I have grown to appreciate some things about this film a little bit more over the course of in the last few years, since I've done this YouTube channel and I've had a chance to revisit some films. But when I saw this film in the theater in 1998, opening weekend, I absolutely hated it. And for the longest time, it was my least favorite movie of all time. I thought they bastardized Hitchcock's beautiful film. And all of the performances in this, with the exception of Anne Heche and William H. Macy, I thought were just laughably awful. The film seemed forced. It didn't seem natural. Some of the things that Gus Van Sant put in it, like Norman Bates masturbating while he watched Marion change, some of the abstract images that were included during the shower scene and when Arbogast is killed, just didn't really flow well for me. Now, having revisited the film, and I'll include a link down below to my review of the film. I revisited this film when Scream Factory put it out last summer on Blu-ray. I do have some things about it that I do like. There are some things that I can appreciate. But still, at the end of the day, it is still my least favorite film because I just don't think it was necessary. And the hardest thing for me is that my love for Tony Perkins and that performance, I just still can't get behind Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. As much as I love the actor and I've seen him in some fantastic movies over the years, this was my introduction to him. I had never seen Swingers when I saw this film. I hadn't really seen him in anything else besides The Lost World. So seeing him play this goofy version of Norman Bates, there was no menace, there was nothing, there was no charisma, nothing about it sold me on the character that he portrayed, and I think that's what always will keep this film down to a low level for me. I still feel like it shouldn't have been touched. Psycho is perfect, why remake it? And that's what I'm going to say about that one. So that is number 5 on my list. Number 4 on my list might shock people because I gave a glowing review of, and I love this film, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the Psycho films, and as much as I love Anthony Perkins, Psycho 3 is going to be number 4 on my list. And I don't know what it is about this film. In fact, Horrific Nightmares JM said the same thing. He doesn't know what it is about this film that keeps it from elevating higher on the list. I think Tony Perkins' direction is fantastic, though. I love his use of colors in this film, just his use of blues, and some of the scenes where there's close-ups of certain things, elements within the Psycho house. I love the scene where he's walking down to the motel trying to find Mother, who's been taken to Cabin 12 by Dwayne Duke. Also, cannot say enough great things about Jeff Fahey, who was fantastic in this as Dwayne Duke. I love Diana Scarwood. I think she's good in the role of Maureen, but she's not a character that you can really warm up to, and maybe that's something that sort of keeps me from really liking the character. I understand she's had a tormented past. She's, at the beginning of the film, she accidentally kills one of the nuns that's in the convent that she's at. There's things that she's very sympathetic, but she's also very disturbed. And there's just a distance in the way that Diana Scarwood plays her in the film that is never really connected to me. Plus, after coming where you had Meg Tilly in Psycho 2, who I absolutely adored in the role as Mary, it was hard for me to warm up to the Maureen character. But this should no way take anything away from Tony Perkins' amazing direction, his amazing acting in this film, because he starred and directed. He did a terrific job of balancing both, this being his first feature film that he directed. It's still got some amazing shots in it. I love the phone booth murder. I love the confrontation with him and Mother at the end, especially when you first see, and it's the only time you see Tony Perkins in the Mother garb speaking as Mother, and I still think it's one of the most chilling scenes in any horror film. Just really gets me, and I absolutely love it. Like I said, there's a couple things that are off for me. The ending has always bothered me, even though I really enjoy the film. I was saddened by the ending, but at the end of the day, it's still a fantastic film, still one of the most influential horror films in my life, and it was the only film starring Tony Perkins as Norman Bates that I got to see in the movie theater, so it'll always hold a special place in my heart. Number 3 on my list is going to go to Psycho for the Beginning. Now, there's some things about this film I still have issues with, and I did talk about it when I reviewed the Blu-ray when it was put out by Scream Factory 2 years ago. My biggest problem with it is the continuity. We learn in Psycho 3 that Mrs. Spool killed Norman's father and pretended to be his mother. And, you find out that whole thing in Psycho 3, whereas in this film, it's never mentioned. They pretty much, Stefano didn't like Psycho 2 or 3, so he kind of excised those story arcs, and Norman Bates' father is found out to have been stung to death by bees. It's always bothered me. It's one of the elements that I'm just like, why, it was 4 years after Psycho 3, and of course they had to keep with continuity. Norman Bates is talking to Fran Ambrose on the phone. He talks about murders that had just happened 4 years prior. And so, of course, that's the events of Psycho 3. They chose to excise that and then talk about a different way that Norman Bates' father was killed. That's something that always bugged me. That's a continuity issue that I've never been crazy about. And then the other element, and I don't know if it was intentional, but the whole thing was that the boyfriend, whose name is Chet Rudolph in this film, according to what Norman told Marion Crane in the original Psycho, was the one that talked Mother into building the motel. Whereas in this film, the motel already exists when he comes around. So that was something I'm like, and Stefano wrote the screenplay for the original Psycho, so I don't understand why that was, unless Norman was just making it up just to sort of, of course, he lied about how his mother and her boyfriend died. So I don't know, that was just something that was a little clunky for me. Other than that, I have to say this film is fantastic. I still think it's Mick Garris's best film. I love Tony Perkins, of course, in it. He's fantastic, even though his role is much more diminished because you're focusing on Norman Bates as a child and a teenager. But Henry Thomas does a terrific job of carrying on the legacy of Norman Bates, and I just think he does a terrific job of being a young Norman Bates, and you see the influence that Mother has over him and the guilt that he feels over what he has done when he kills her and her boyfriend. I think the scene where Mother is killed is one of the most, it's intense and very well acted. I think Olivia Hussey is completely amazing as Norma Bates. She was nothing like I expected, because I think, and it's something that Mick Garris mentions in the Psycho Legacy documentary, that we've always known Mother to be an old woman, just by the way that the voice and the way that she looked with the school mom kind of pulled back hair bun. That was how our image of Mother was, this old woman. And there's a great line in this where Norman Bates tells Fran Ambrose that in my mind she grew old, because he couldn't make her voice sound as sweet as it was. And I think that was just a really nice little touch, and it really gave some depth to how Norman coped with the fact of what he did. But yeah, I think this film is great. I had hoped that they would have done the fifth film, but of course, Tony Perkins was sick with HIV when they shot this film, and he died 2 years after this film came out. They initially were supposed to do a fifth film called Psycho 5: The End, but I think for the first four films, this is a perfect ending to that story of Norman Bates. I like the way this film ended. Some people didn't, but I really thought it was a nice bookend to the Psycho film franchise. Okay, here's where it's going to get controversial. My number two, and this is just how I feel now, is going to go to Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece, Psycho. I absolutely love this film. This is one of the most important films in my entire life. This is the second film in the Psycho franchise that I saw. This film just means so much to me, and I've seen it so many times. In fact, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to be able to catch it on the big screen, which was amazing. I noticed things that I never noticed before, but just the performances in this film, aside from the amazing Tony Perkins, Janet Leigh was fantastic as Marion Crane. I had the honor of meeting Janet Leigh back in 1995, and I've talked about it on this channel before. I do have her autograph in her book on the making of Psycho, behind the scenes, which is probably one of the most prized things I have in this room, because it's something I can never get again. And I had the opportunity to talk to her, to shake her hand. It means so much to me, and the fact that she's been gone for 13 years now is very sad to me. But I'm so grateful for that time that I got to talk to her and tell her how much what she had done in this film meant to me. But also Vera Miles as Lila Crane. I love her so much. The late John Gavin, who just passed away earlier this year, fantastic as Sam Loomis. A lot of people think he's wooden, but I really like him in the role. And then, of course, the amazing Martin Balsam as Arbogast. I absolutely love him. Next to Tony Perkins, in terms of the men in the film, he's my second favorite performance. I love the interaction between Arbogast and Norman Bates in the motel parlor. One of my favorite scenes in movie history. But yeah, just everything about this film. Hitchcock's direction is so fantastic. I love the sets. I love the house, the motel. I love the story. It's so great. It's such a fantastic film. And I can't say enough great things about it that people haven't already heard me talk about before. Psycho is one of the best films ever made. Now for my number one. And again, like I said, this changes from time to time, but for right now, Psycho 2 is my favorite film in the Psycho franchise. I have a deep history with Psycho 2. It's the first film in the franchise that I ever saw. So I never saw Norman Bates as the killer. I saw him as a man trying to regain his sanity and start his life over. The first time I watched Psycho 2 was in the summer of 1984 when it aired on HBO or Showtime, and it just blew me away. It was probably one of the first really adult movies I had ever seen. You know, I'd seen American Werewolf in London, Creepshow, Salem's Lot. I had seen those before I saw Psycho 2 and Friday the 13th, but with Psycho 2, this was a real person. This wasn't a fantasy monster or a werewolf or a vampire. This was a real human being. Gone through some really dark times in his life, is trying to move on after the horrific murders he had committed because of a mental problem, and people are trying to drive him mad again. And then you have this revenge aspect of somebody that's committing murders dressing like Norman's mother, and people are, you know, is this Norman? Is this not Norman? You know, it really is an emotional film to watch, and I think Tony Perkins deserved an Oscar nomination for his performance in this film. He is absolutely fantastic and mesmerizing in this role of Norman Bates, and I think it's because of this film that you began to empathize with this poor man. Now, of course, in Psycho, you do it first, but then you find out what he has done. But it's almost like when you watch this film, you forgive Norman Bates for what he has done, and you realize that he had a traumatic childhood. He was abused emotionally and physically by his mother, and it did something, you know, that caused him to lose his mind. And all he's trying to do now is be the good person that we know him to be. And because of his past deeds, he is not allowed that peace, because what he has done, the atrocities he committed, can never be forgiven. And I just think it's just a masterful performance that doesn't get enough credit, and this film itself doesn't get enough credit. It's masterfully directed by Richard Franklin, who was a student of Hitchcock's, also written by the amazing Tom Holland. I always feel like the first two Psycho films tie together beautifully. Also, the performances. Of course, you had Vera Miles coming back to reprise her role of Lila, the late Robert Loggia, who was a huge fan of, as Dr. Raymond. And then, of course, you can't say enough great things about one of my first crushes was Meg Tilly as Mary. And I think, like I said when I talked about Psycho 3, I think that's why I had such a hard time warming up to Maureen in that film. Because Mary Loomis is so awesome in this film. Yes, she's a complex character as well, but you really feel that and I know that there was problems on set between Anthony Perkins and Meg Tilly, but you really feel that their relationship is palpable. You really feel that connection between the two, and their performances together is seamless. You really feel like she cares about Norman. You really feel like he cares about her. You feel that fear about, is Norman going to go off the deep end again? Is Mary responsible for what's going on? And just like the first Psycho, it's a terrific mystery. You will be guessing until the end of this film, and I love even though the ending of this film is so tragic and depressing, it feels just like it was the natural course to go. And I love the way this film ends, as much as it saddens me every time I watch it. This film still affects me emotionally. It has my favorite horror movie score of all time by the amazing Jerry Goldsmith. And I can't say enough great things about it. I think it's just #1 for me because it was the first film that introduced me to this universe, the Psycho universe, as well as the amazing Tony Perkins. So Psycho 2 is my favorite film in the Psycho franchise. So that is it, my fellow fiends, talking about the Psycho film franchise as well as the amazing Psycho Legacy documentary. So thanks so much again, everyone, for watching. Let me know what your favorite Psycho film is down in the comment section below. Let me know if you're a big fan of this franchise like I am. I can't say enough great things about it. It will be a part of my life forever. It will always be my second favorite horror film franchise. Absolutely love it. And I want to thank everyone for supporting this channel and continuing to watch my videos. If you like the content that I'm putting out, please hit the subscribe button, little bell icon down below. You'll be alerted every time I do a new video. And if you want to check me out on social media, I got my links down below. Really appreciate it. Stay tuned for some great stuff coming real soon. Take it easy. Stay scared as always. Peace.